Good evening. Well, tonight I've got breaking news now. I can reveal the University of Sydney has called in police to investigate potential unlawful conduct linked to the pro-Palestinian encampment. This after protesters engaged in inappropriate behaviour, including allegedly entering buildings and harassing staff. The University of Sydney is tonight on high alert. Vice-Chancellor Mark Scott says they're monitoring the behaviour of the encampment and, in the interest of safety, some buildings may be put into secure mode, meaning a student or staff card would be needed for entry. Mark Scott has outlined some serious violations of the student charter that he says may have broken the law. In an email sent to students this evening, he says that protesters entered buildings and have allegedly harassed staff. He says a truck driver made an unauthorised delivery to the encampment, spitting at and engaging in other offensive and abusive behaviour directed to university staff. He also said that slogans have been graffitied on the walls of the quadrangle and that protesters blocked City Road and endangered the health and well-being of students and staff. In his email to students, he wrote, and I quote, "We are investigating these violations of our policies in the usual way, including cooperating with police investigations where alleged unacceptable conduct might have broken the law." So that breaking news right there. The University of Sydney has called police to investigate several instances of what it says is inappropriate conduct that has likely violated its student charter and may have broken the law. Now, this comes after a day of dramatic scenes as police stormed Columbia University and arrested dozens of pro-Palestinian extremists. The students had seized an academic building called Hamilton Hall and then barricaded themselves inside. Intifada, Intifada. From the river to the sea. Look at them all, wearing the Hamas scarves, covering their faces. This isn't a peaceful protest movement. This is criminality, trespassing, vandalism, lawlessness and terror. There were also reports the pro-Hamas protesters were holding at least one janitor hostage and perhaps more. Students have described the night of terror that unfolded before the police were finally called in.
Last night at 1 a.m., the student protests that have embroiled campus reached new extremes as protesters occupied an academic building. This comes nearly 2 weeks after the unauthorized encampments began on campus and after months of disruptive protests that have embroiled Morningside Heights. As of 2 p.m. today, the campus is still occupied. When the cops show up is anybody's guess.
What's so terrifying is that last night, even though campus was locked down, we saw unaffiliated masked individuals climbing through open windows in those dorm buildings. And there are Jewish students that live there that have mezuzot, that have, Jewish identifying objects on their doors, Israeli flags, things like that. And so these protesters pose a serious imminent danger, not only to those Jewish students, but to all the students living there.
Columbia gave the protesters an ultimatum: leave or face expulsion. They refused to leave, and after around 20 hours of locking themselves in Hamilton Hall, Columbia finally called in the NYPD, and hundreds of police officers in riot gear descended on the uni. Imagine that lawlessness, that insanity continuing for 20 hours. You'd be worried for your safety if you were a student on campus, even if you weren't Jewish. Now, the NYPD officers were forced to break in through the windows. I mean, this is incredible footage to see the line of officers entering through the second-story window.
You can see here, this is a little earlier, you see police going into Hamilton Hall. That is a hall that they seized, and now we're being told that Hamilton Hall is clear. But meantime, all the Jewish students still being told to stay away, and most of the buildings remain on lockdown.
Dozens of protesters were arrested. They were hurtled onto police buses, yelling "Free Palestine" as they were removed. This all took place just after 9 o'clock p.m. local time in New York. Now, this would be shocking anywhere, but to think this all unfolded on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, it was a tense night. It took just a couple of hours for the police to regain control of the hall. But tensions are now high. There are concerns for what daylight will bring because many were expecting that the protesters would be released just a few hours after their arrest. But Colombia is not alone here. Harvard replaced the American flag with the Palestinian flag. There are pro-Palestinian encampments at Ivy League colleges across America. Now, we've all been very critical of how Colombia handled this encampment over the past 2 weeks, but we saw here, finally, decisive action in calling in the police to regain control of the campus. But this madness has even spread to Australia, where Melbourne University, the University of Sydney, and now today, Monash also had a pro-Palestinian protest. Now, this was what happened at Monash University today.
Across the world, in the US, at Columbia University initially, they've started a Gaza Solidarity encampment, and now they've started more in Spain, in Japan, and in Australia now as well. We couldn't let them all have the fun, so we started our own at Monash University.
To think that that is unfolding at the university named after Sir John Monash, one of the most prominent and accomplished Jews in Australia's history, who was famously knighted by King George V on the battlefield in the First World War. How shameful to think of the behaviour of students learning at an institution that bears his name. The comments of one Australian student today exemplified just how corrupted their reasoning as a collective has become. Beatrice Tucker, she was a student representative on ANU's Student Association last year. She's an organiser of the pro-Palestinian encampment at ANU in Canberra. Well, she told the ABC yesterday that she supports Hamas. Have a listen.
But surely, if you're going to protest against that, you've also got to send a message to Hamas to release the hostages, don't you?
Well, I actually say that Hamas deserve our unconditional support, not because I agree with their strategy.
You can't condemn what Hamas did in October last year?
I will not condemn what Hamas did. We must be unconditional, but we must be critical also,
Luke?
right?
No, I did not condemn.
So, I mean, they came in, there were so many people got killed, innocent people got killed, babies got killed, people are still being held hostage.
Well, that's actually, like, the thing about babies being killed and the numbers are quite false, right? There's been a lot of misinformation spread around about who killed who, right?
Right.
And actually, like, there's a lot of evidence to say that Israel and the IDF themselves actually also did murder a lot of their own people. So
I don't know if there's any proof to that either.
That was, of course, an edited excerpt of a longer interview, but this is the student movement exposed. Excuses for Hamas perpetuating their false narratives and their propaganda and just spreading blatant lies. We know categorically for a fact that entire families, including babies and children, were killed on October 7. We've seen the photographs, we've covered their funerals. What ignorant, hateful, stupid students to try and rewrite the events of October 7. I mean, this is the equivalent of Holocaust deniers. If you're pro-Hamas, you're racist, you're anti-Semitic, it is pure and simple. These students, whether it's at Columbia or in Australia, have lost all perspective. They've lost the ability to behave rationally. They follow the groupthink without stepping back to question what they're actually protesting for. Israel. Israel was attacked on October 7. It is now trying to defeat the terrorists that brutally slaughtered babies, women and children. These terrorists unpicked locks to safe houses, gunned down entire families, and then rejoiced in the bloodshed. They were on a high from their own depravity. They shouted Allahu Akbar, and they called their parents back in Gaza to celebrate and boast. Yet it's these terrorists that the students sympathise with, not the innocent Jewish families killed. The students chant Intifada. They openly say they support Hamas. And we all shudder to think this is meant to be the best of the best, the cream of the crop of the next generation, graduating from elite universities the Western world over. Well, if we consider that Joe Biden and the likes of Anthony Albanese have no spine or courage, well, imagine this lot running the world in 20 years' time. No, thank you. The wake of October 7 has shown us how vulnerable the values and moral foundations that underpin our Western civilization are. The very values that Sir John Monash, a son of German, Polish, Jewish migrants, went to battle to fight for. Now, later tonight, I'm going to speak with Avi Yemeni, a journalist who was harassed and threatened by thugs outside Victorian Parliament. Also tonight, the heartbreaking phone call from the Perth grandmother to Immigration Minister Andrew Giles saying that she feels unsafe, but Giles and Claire O'Neill are refusing to resign. Also this evening, Bruce Lohman granted more time to consider appealing the verdict that branded him a rapist. But now let's bring in tonight's political panel, former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger and Sky News host Steve Price. Michael, Steve, great to see you. Michael, starting with
Sharri,
you, what's your reaction to the very shocking events that we saw unfold today at Columbia?
Well, there's a sickness in Western society. Left-wing demonstrations are designed to intimidate, which is exactly what they're doing. These privileged students are just a disgrace. And they're absolutely a disgrace. Of course, their Australian counterparts now following, designed to create outrage. You know, Sharri, as you said, this is not about being pro-Palestinian. I mean, they're not complaining about the war in the Ukraine. Have they complained about the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Are we seeing massive demonstrations at these universities? No. Are we seeing, demonstrations against other human rights injustices around the world? No. What is common to these demonstrations? Jews. These people hate Jews. They are racists. They are anti-Semites. There's elements of neo-Nazism amongst all of these groups. I'm sorry, it's not pro-Palestinian. There'd be hardly a Palestinian amongst them. This is just an outbreak of Jewish hatred that we haven't seen in the world since the 1940s. Thank goodness there's one university, Columbia, who are doing something about us, and let's hope all of the universities remove these campsites, crack down on this Jewish hatred, expel the students who are involved in acts against Jews, and whatever happened to the safe spaces that we were meant to have at universities, by the way, to help people from the LGBTI community or gay people. Doesn't that apply to Jews? No, disgusting, and it's time for authority to take a lead against these Jewish haters who are disgusting.
I mean,
Sharri.
I think they're driven by anti-Semitism, but the sort of behaviour that we saw at Columbia, where they, broke into that academic building and where they barricaded themselves inside, the sort of aggression that was unfolding, that would have made anyone on campus feel unsafe. There were reports, as we heard, that student who was on Fox News with Sean Hannity, she spoke about masked men crawling up through the windows of the university dorms. Richo, this is a threatening environment for everyone, no matter your religion.
But of course, if you have a peaceful, quiet demonstration, Sharri, it doesn't get publicity.
No.
So there's a deliberate act by the left to create as much campus outrage as they can, so that people like us show these this behaviour, and that's why they do it.
Yeah, Steve Price, what do you think about this? And I've just broken the news tonight. You can see the strap still up on the screen. The University of Sydney has called in police to investigate several instances of that they say is potentially unlawful conduct. I spoke about them at the start of the show. It includes allegations that there was a truck driver who was threatening, who went to the encampment. He was spitting out and abusing staff members. There are allegations that some of the protesters went into university buildings and were harassing staff, graffiti on the quadrangle. Steve Price, this at the University of Sydney.
Look, Michael's quite right. I mean, Sharri, most of these protesters wouldn't even be able to point to Palestine on a map if you gave them the opportunity. And they're just copying what they're seeing in the United States. So they get up presumably in the morning and they turn on Sky's coverage, or they turn on, CNN or whatever, and they say, look what they're doing in Colombia, why don't we do that here? I mean, one of the fears I have is that I don't have great faith in the police departments of particularly Victoria, but also New South Wales, to actually clear these people out. I mean, we seem to have this softly approach in Australia at the moment where if you're Jewish with a flag, as we saw with that example outside the Melbourne Town Hall a few weeks ago, you're moved on and taken into the next street and told to go home. But if you are vocal, aggressive, pro-Palestine protesters outside a council meeting, you're allowed to stay there. I would hope that the premiers of the states of particularly New South Wales and Victoria, but everywhere in the country, call in their police commissioners at some stage in the next couple of days and say, look, we're not going to let this keep going. I mean, I don't know about Sydney currently, but every weekend in Melbourne, there are pro-Palestine rallies. And even yesterday, we had people climbing up cranes at the Port of Melbourne, causing $100,000 worth of delayed activity in the biggest port in the country. So we've got to have the police having some courage to go in there and clean these demonstrations out.
And they're not going to do it unless the chancellors and vice chancellors ask them to do it. And, at Columbia, they didn't act until it was at such an extreme state, until an entire academic building had been taken over, or, as the protesters said, liberated. Michael Kroger, the Prime Minister, today unveiled his nearly $1 billion plan to solve domestic violence. What did you think of the ideas he gave? And do you trust that they will work, given in the election he announced 500 frontline domestic violence workers, and as of March, nearly last month, we're now 1st of May, only 17 had been employed?
Look, I saw that. Good on them and the premiers for taking some action on this disgraceful eventuality that's happening in Australia today against women being murdered every 4 or 5 days. I mean, this is not Australia, is it, that this is happening? But I'd say about Albanese, everything's political. There's no principles involved in anything. Everything about Albanese is about the politics of the matter. So he's been to Alice Springs, for a few hours again the other day. It's been a crisis point for a year. He hadn't been there for a year. Everything is about the politics and there are no principles. I don't know what great principles Albanese's running on anymore. There's a problem, he tries to fix it, but, he's half-hearted on a lot of things, and like most of his promises, it'll probably come to nothing. As you said, these positions haven't been filled, 500 of them, and, so he's taken his eye off the ball. Someone's just pointed out to him in the last couple of days how few have been filled, so of course he's immediately, onto that issue. Everything's about the announcement, everything's about politics, and I think he's almost ranking down there with Kevin Rudd. No, I don't rate him highly.
Yeah, all about the announcement, not about the follow-through. Look, this was a weird moment today. Albanese was asked about his awkward interaction with the organiser of the weekend's domestic violence rally. But Steve Price, he turned it somehow into a criticism of Sky News. Why would he do that?
Well, because he's embarrassed about what he did at the weekend. I mean, he inserted himself into that rally, and there's Vision, which was shown on the ABC of all places first, where he said, I'm the Prime Minister, I want to speak. And he's now embarrassed. And so every time he's going to be asked about this, he's going to try and deflect. And that's what he did again today when Andrew Clennell asked him a perfectly legitimate question about, well, what did he do and why did this young woman end up in tears? He looked foolish at that rally. And then today he's called together this National Cabinet meeting. Now, I had this foolish impression that we might get some real change out of that today. Obviously, they're going to throw a huge amount of money at what is a dreadful problem. But what he should have done was got all the premiers together and said, listen, you're in charge of the magistrates and the court systems in your individual states. Most of these blokes who get out and bash women, a lot of them are out on bail. They've either been bailed once or twice or more, and they don't respect AVOs. The police don't enforce them. There's no ankle bracelets. Why didn't the PM bang a few heads together with the premiers today and say, get onto your court system and stop letting these people get out on the street? I mean, what he did was, as Michael said, he spoke about the politics of it. He put out $1 billion, and I hope it helps. But that's not the root of the problem. The root of the problem is these blokes keep getting let out onto the street time and time and time again.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And the problem is the bail issue. It's that women aren't believed enough. It's that the men are let go. It's not social media. It's not mostly social media. Steve Price, Michael Kroger, thank you both so much for joining me this evening. Now, coming up, Pauline Hanson fights accusations of racism from Green Senator Mehreen Faruqi. You know, the one who posed for a racist photograph in front of a sign that said, put Jews in the bin. We'll tell you how that has gone today. Also, Bruce Lerman granted more time to lodge an appeal. We'll get the latest from the federal court. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, news today, a judge has allowed Bruce Lerman to have more time to decide whether he's going to appeal the judgment that branded him a rapist. Lerman has already hired a top appeals barrister to look at this potential appeal. The legal bill for the trial is already expected to reach more than $10 million, a massive amount for anyone, but especially for an out-of-work law student. Let's bring in now Sam Macedoni from Macedoni Legal. Sam, thanks so much for your time.
Good
what
evening,
happened in court today?
Well, today was all about costs. Who has to pay costs? Now, the judge has indicated that Lerman will have to pay some sort of costs, and he'll have to pay costs to Channel 10 and also to Wilkinson because he basically lost the defamation case. He didn't lose all of it because the argument or the defence of public interest didn't make the grade. Only the argument of truth was found on the balance of probabilities. So it seems likely to me that Lerman will pay probably a vast majority of the costs that 10 is seeking. There's also another argument between Wilkinson and Channel 10. Channel 10 is saying, yes, we'll pay Lisa's costs, but not all of them because a lot of the matters that she argued were common to our case. And so we're doubling up and we're not going to pay for a double up. So there's all that situation as well. Then Orbach, who gave evidence as well, he wanted $17,500 for appearing to give evidence. And the judge said that was incredible, probably that won't happen anyway. So it just seems to me that I don't think there'll be too many winners out of all of this and costs will be all over the place. It's a very complex situation.
Look, given Bruce Lerman did lose, if he chooses not to appeal, and if there is this up to $10 million legal bill, it's well known that he doesn't have that sort of money. So what happens in that case?
Well, if you don't have money and you go bankrupt, you can't pay any money. So people that have actually paid good money to defend themselves or to run their cases will miss out. It's as simple as that.
So 10 would have to pay millions in any case, even if they've won.
Yes, and they won't be able to get it back. Likewise, Lehman's going to have to pay his lawyers, and if he goes bankrupt and he can't pay them, then they miss out as well. So I think that's the reason behind the decision that he wants another extra 2 weeks on top of the 4 that's permissible to see whether he wants to lodge an appeal. Because unless he lodges an appeal and wins, he's going to be in a lot of trouble.
Now, the process that Justice Michael Lee undertook, we all sat through it. It was careful, it was forensic. You may or may not agree with his judgment, but he did seem to be fair and impartial. What is the process if there is an appeal? Do people have to give evidence again, or does an appeals judge simply look at the verdict and hear submissions from Bruce Lerman?
If it goes on appeal, it's just a matter of looking at the 3 judges looking at the transcript. The evidence will simply be what's in the transcript of the evidence that's already given. There'll be no fresh evidence given unless there's some special application for some special evidence to be given, but I doubt that will happen. Then it really remains a question of submissions by either side to the appeal court as to whether Justice Lee got it wrong or not.
Now, there's another fascinating legal case that's been going on for the past 3 days between One Nation leader Pauline Hanson and Greens Senator Mehreen Faruqi. Now, the Greens Senator Mehreen Faruqi is suing Hanson for racial discrimination over a tweet where Pauline Hanson told her to go back to Pakistan. But Sam, today Pauline Hanson argued that actually she had also told a white man, Darren Hinch, to go back to where he comes from.
Go back to New Zealand, yeah.
So what's the argument that she's running here?
The senator indicated that Pauline Hanson has a reputation of telling coloured migrants to go back home, and that she's never really told a white man to go back home. So Hanson's lawyer produced a video where Hanson told Darren Hinch, a white person, to go back to New Zealand until he could get some manners and then basically come back. Hanson's also argued that what she said was simply in reply to a tweet that the senator had put out about not being able and not willing to mourn the death of Queen Elizabeth because she was an Englishman and they'd come here and rape and pillage the country and took everything away from the Indigenous people. So she wasn't going to mourn them. And Hanson said she was really asking for a response, and the response she got was the one Hanson gave her. So she said it was fair comment and she honestly believed in what she said, and therefore, it's free speech.
Yeah. Look, given Mehreen Faruqi has posed in front of a sign where a woman was holding a poster saying that Jews should get in the bin, this whole affair seems to be somewhat hypocritical, to say the least. Very
hypocritical.
Right.
And that's another one the judge has to deal with.
Indeed. Sam Macedoni, thank you so much for your
Sharri.
time. Now, we're going to cross live to Washington now. We're returning to our top story, the police raids that took place at Columbia University last night, their time, just around midday, our time today. Hundreds of police going in to arrest dozens of students who had blockaded a campus building. Donald Trump spoke about this with Sean Hannity on Fox News just as the police operation was unfolding.
Well, it's just such a sad thing to see, Sean. When you look at this, it's not even believable. If you go back a year or go back 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, this would not even be possible to think about.
The Australian's Washington correspondent Adam Crichton joins us now. Adam, this in Manhattan, this lawlessness at its worst before finally Columbia called in the police.
Yes, that's right. Some pretty extraordinary scenes. And indeed, these were the worst protests, I think, since 1968 on the Columbia campus. That was, of course, the Vietnam War protests. So quite a significant evening indeed. I mean, it seems to have calmed down now. Hundreds of police went in there. I'm sure you've shown all the images, all the video, but it was getting very violent and students were quite understandably feeling very unsafe. And so I think it was perfectly reasonable of the authorities there to finally call the police in after what had been about 3 weeks of disrupting classes and, of course, sending all courses online as well. So I think we're seeing the right thing happen now.
There was also police activity at UCLA in the hours after. What happened there?
reluctant to join in, but finally the far-left mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, even she said that there were extreme acts of violence among the protesters, and so she had no choice, she said, but to send in the police there as well. And so the riots there have also been cleared now, as I understand it, but they could certainly flare up again in coming days if if things flare up over in Israel and Gaza. Of course, the war's still going. That's what's so extraordinary about these protests, I think, is that they're as large as 1968, but there's no draft this time. So this is pure politics here. So that's somewhat concerning and a very bad look for Joe Biden, one has to say.
Well, the protesters in this occasion are on the wrong side of history. There's no doubt about it. They're siding with Hamas. They're engaging in extreme anti-Semitism, violence, aggression. Joe Biden has been accused of basically being silent on this issue.
Yeah, well, look, it's no surprise, really, because, this is his base, basically. This is the demographic that in November will help organise for him, will campaign for the Democratic Party, generally speaking. And so he's very reluctant to criticise them. Plus he's worried about votes in those northern states, Michigan, etc., where there's very large Arabic populations. So I think he's going to look very weak for the next 24 or so hours. He's going to be reluctant to say too much. Although I suspect he'll probably say something tomorrow, but it won't be very much.
Donald Trump, I thought his comments were very strong. He sort of said, look, no one likes what's happening over there, but the sooner Israel defeats Hamas, the sooner this comes to an end. He was really strong, I thought, in still backing in the need for Netanyahu to send in the IDF to Rafah to defeat Hamas, which are still holding 134 innocent people, including babies, including baby Kafir, hostage.
Yeah, that's right. It's obviously very depressing. And I think you're right to point out that that former President Trump tonight in his remarks was a lot more encouraging of Israel, a lot more supportive of Israel than he has been so far. He's been a little bit ambiguous, I would say, over the past few months, sometimes saying that they should end the war quickly, that it was very, very bad PR for Israel. But yes, he was a lot more forthright tonight. And I think he's just being a sharp politician. He's taking advantage of how bad this looks for Joe Biden to have these, the worst riots in 56 years to be occurring on US campuses.
Yeah. Well, he has had a long-standing position of supporting Israel despite his more recent rift with Netanyahu. So it could be what he truly believes, despite the fact that there have been some who are influential in the Republican Party pushing this isolationist movement where they don't want to support Ukraine, they don't want to support Israel, it's America first. And the problem with that argument, in my strong opinion, is that America needs to be the leader of the free world. America needs to show that leadership. Otherwise, it's just paving the way for the rise of the dictators, Iran, China, Russia, and North Korea. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, look, certainly I can see your point. And the reality is only probably a third at most of Americans are isolationist in the way that you describe. And so I think the majority is still very supportive of a fairly assertive foreign policy. But on the other hand, I can understand why increasing shares of Americans, especially the poorer ones, are getting more and more furious by having to support all these wars overseas all the time, because, of course, it's only their country that really has to. And so they miss out on all the various social security that we have in Australia, that the Europeans have in Europe. And, they look at that and they say, just because I was born in the US, why do I have to pay for this enormous military? So that's their argument. So I can see both, I can see both sides, but I think, the bottom line is most Americans are still supportive of these foreign wars.
Yeah. All right, Adam Crichton, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see how that continues to unfold overnight. Now, maybe these student protesters that we've been speaking about tonight should watch the new documentary that Sheryl Sandberg has made about October 7th. Well, my Sky News colleague Erin Molan is hosting the Australian premiere this evening, and she joined me a short while ago.
Good evening to you, Sharri. It's the kind of occasion that I'm really honoured to host. I think the thing for me that hits home, and particularly the angle of the sexual violence against women and children, is the complete lack of public support from those who purport to be feminists. And this documentary doesn't lie. This is what occurred, and it is heartbreaking, but it is so important to see.
Yeah, Erin says it's a powerful documentary. I'm going to be interviewing on this show next week the director. Now, coming up, the Labor ministers responsible for the immigration detainee crisis finally front the media only to deflect blame. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, Claire O'Neill and Andrew Giles are insisting they shouldn't have to resign following revelations the detainee who allegedly bashed an elderly grandmother was not wearing an ankle bracelet. Ninette Simons demanded answers from the Immigration Minister. Have a look.
I don't feel very safe here anymore, unfortunately. I don't. But I'm doing my best to live here. I don't know. Was his ankle bracelet removed in March? We should be safe, but, you know, we feel we've been let down.
And that was just tonight on 9 News. And then Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill was on Sunrise this morning trying to deflect questions about whether she was up to the job.
Will you resign?
Nat, before we get into that, could I just express my deepest sympathies to Philip and Ninette Simons, who have been the victim of this horrendous crime. And if I had the simple power to put him back in detention, I would do it in a heartbeat.
So you accept no responsibility?
What I have to do is manage the situation that the High Court has left for us in changing the law, whether I am Home Affairs Minister, whether Jane was Home Affairs Minister, whether Peter Dutton was Home Affairs Minister, we would be grappling with the same problem. And I just say to you really directly, Nat, that the opposition has had, their time playing a lot of politics with this, playing the politics within an inch of its life. I have not heard them make a single suggestion of something that could have been done differently, and if they would like to do it, I'm all ears.
Nat Parr did an excellent job there, but Immigration Minister Andrew Giles also said he wouldn't resign.
What is absolutely telling is that the opposition are only interested in talking about problems, never about solutions in any aspect of this portfolio. I'm determined to get on with my job and to work hard at it each and every day.
OK, let's bring in tonight's political panel, National Senate Leader Bridget McKenzie and former Labor Minister Graham Richardson. Welcome to you both. Well, Bridget, reports today as well that the government's daily talking points, this is messaging that are given to MPs to tell them what they should say when pesky journalists ask them questions, that this included incorrect bail information. Bridget, this is just one scandal after another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your opening package, Sharri, really outlined how these two ministers are, the dodgy brothers of the immigration system in this country. The fact that an elderly grandmother in Australia in the 21st century, because of these two inability to get their portfolio settings right, has been bashed in her own home, and then they refuse to take responsibility. Part of being a leader means you own the successes and you have to own the failures, and then you have to fix them. They are refusing to do that. The fact is, and the minister knows this, that the government could have actually applied for bail not to be given to a number of these particular individuals, but they didn't. They didn't do it. Now, why didn't they make those decisions when they had the chance back in February for this particular offender? This has been going on for November. They've assured us that measures were in place to keep Australians safe. And at every turn, they're not. And at some point, you have to take responsibility as a minister and own up to it. And if you don't do it, then the Prime Minister has to. So you've almost got a failure of leadership on two levels.
Yeah. Graham Richardson, look, you've been around many governments. Why won't Albanese sack Andrew Giles? Because clearly we've seen by now he's just not up to the job. And border security, the safety of Australians is important.
Oh, of course it is. But Prime Ministers don't like to lose one of their numbers. I remember Paul Keating was absolutely strong about that you never show the other side that you're conceding weakness. But sometimes the weakness is so overwhelming you've got not much choice but to make some kind of concession.
And it's at that point, isn't it? Isn't that time now for Albanese to concede that this is a problem? Because he can't pretend there's no weakness anymore. We can all see it. An elderly grandmother has been violently bashed, and the government didn't oppose bail, and they didn't make him wear an ankle bracelet. Just back to Richo, yeah.
I think this is called a stuff-up. I don't think there's any way you can put it nicely. They stuffed it up.
All right. Well,
but Richo, they're continuing to stuff it up. I mean, there's over 150 of these individuals. This isn't the only incident. And it seems that at every turn, they're not learning from the last mistake. And the absolute definition of idiocy is continuing to do the same thing time and time again and expecting a different result. Australians aren't safe, and that's your number one job.
Graham Richardson.
Well, I'm not going to argue with that, frankly. This is not something I'm going to sit here and defend. It is a terrible stuff-up. I don't think it requires resignations, but it requires full apologies. It requires people getting down on their knees and saying, forgive me, because this is a stuff-up of some magnitude, and it's not something I like to see.
I actually think this does require a resignation. I think when you have an elderly woman who's been beaten directly because the Commonwealth government didn't oppose bail. He could have been behind bars. Obviously, I should be saying allegedly, the detainee who allegedly bashed the grandmother, the government didn't oppose bail and didn't force him to wear an ankle bracelet. I think when the mistakes are that grave, when we've seen just how badly she was allegedly bashed, we've seen the graphic photograph, we've heard from her tonight on 9 News, I think when it's this point, actually, that does require a resignation, Bridget.
You're right, Sharri, and that's what we've been calling for. And I just want to take you back even aside from this incident and the failure to apply to oppose bail. If you go back to why we're even having this conversation, it's because this guy never read his briefs, didn't listen to departmental advice, and headed off to a court case without actually securing the outcome, the sophisticated and nuanced outcome we all needed to ensure that these detainees weren't released into community. And the fact that Claire O'Neill has the gall to get on Sunrise and make it all about her instead of the security of Australians, she should be on the phone every single morning to her counterparts in state and territories, making sure they can assure her, to a man and a woman, that every single one of those detainees, they know where they are, what they're doing, and are they being monitored? Because right now she does not have the oversight in place, and that is incompetency.
Richard, I just want to ask you about the broader political landscape here. You've got this scandal that keeps rearing up every single month. You've got the rising cost of living. We're looking at interest rates rising yet again. And we're looking at the rising social unrest, the extremism, the terror incidents that we've seen. How do you think this plays for Albanese? Do you think the public are starting to look at him and think, well, maybe he's not up to the job?
I wouldn't think that would occur yet. I think there'd have to be more incidents before we get to that point. You've got to remember, to start off with, they like Albo. He's a nice fella. He comes across as a nice fella, and that's how they see him. So he's got an advantage that over Peter Dutton that is quite significant. But of course, you can't rely on it being there forever, and so it doesn't mean that you can be guilty of inaction. Because that leads in the end to defeat.
When you say they like Albo, is this your impression of what the public think of him, or are you speaking about research here? Political research?
Both. I don't think there's much doubt when you go around yourself you can pick it up, but the research is pretty clear in it. They like Albo, and he's a very decent guy. He's easy to like.
I don't know what this says about the circles that I socialise in, but I never come across anyone who likes Albo, and I haven't since before the Voice campaign. All right, Graham Richardson and Bridget McKenzie, thank you both so much for your time this evening. Now, after the break, the moment, journalist Avi Yemeni is harassed by protesters at a Victorian rally. He's going to join me live next. Welcome back. Well, in some confronting footage, pro-Palestinian protesters have been captured verbally threatening and intimidating Rebel News journalist Avi Yemeni. Have a look.
I'm gonna get you. You're gonna what? I'm gonna What are you going to do? Leave. What are you going to do? Leave. What are you going to do? Leave. What are you going to do?
Hey, don't touch it. You came my way. You off. You understand?
Stay out of my
You came my way.
Stay out of the camera way.
Voilà. You want me to show you?
Now, one of the men in that video is known to police, out on bail after being accused of involvement in a violent abduction and assault. Avi was trying to interview the demonstrators in Melbourne, and that was their reaction. One individual, as you saw, hurling a glass bottle towards them. And Avi joins me now. Avi, what happened? Why did you decide to go down there?
Well, firstly, thank you, Sharri, for having me, because whilst that confronting footage has gone viral around the world, in fact, I've done a lot of media appearances today, especially around Israel. You're the first one in Australia, so it's odd that local media isn't interested in what's happening on our streets here in Melbourne, but overseas they are. I went there because we saw over the weekend there was that camp has been there since October 7. That small group of people camping there every day, and every weekend we see the mass rallies that then start there from that core group. And over the weekend we saw an Aussie, who went to the football, a Sydney Swans supporter, who got, it looks like, misidentified as a Zionist, attacked, assaulted, chased into the pub, police kind of forced to block the groups. No one was arrested. And I wanted to go there just to find out how did it come to that? How did somebody get charged with the horrific offence of being a Zionist in Melbourne in 2024 that they escalated to violence? And I basically walked down to where they're camped out. I thought there would be 2 people. I didn't. Generally, when you walk past there in the day, there's not very many of them. There's their big sign and all their flags. And there happened to be 4 of them, and some of the the most known, I guess, leaders within the group. And as soon as I even engaged, immediately he struck my microphone, and I don't even think the footage you showed was the worst of it. They were threatening to sexually assault my mother, to kill somebody at one point. They threw glass bottles, all in front of police.
Now, I saw the footage that you referred to with that footy fan, the Sydney Swans fan, and he actually said when they started kind of being aggressive towards him, he said, "Oh, yeah, I agree with you. What's happening over there is terrible." and yet they still chased him. I mean, what he said was he agreed with them. Look, there were police standing there when you had that confrontation with the protesters. What did the police on the scene do? How did they react?
So I've got to say, they were overwhelmed. It was PSOs at first, who are in charge of Parliament security, but they're part of the Victoria Police, the protective services. They were overwhelmed. They were clearly scared. They were chaotic. They were holding their pepper spray, pointing it at all directions. Didn't know where to shoot at. They were trying to press their emergency. I think it must be like an emergency, an alarm or something, and he kept fumbling. Until they finally managed to call for some backup. And when the backup came, so, the bottles being thrown, glass bottles thrown at us, threats, direct threats.
Yeah, it was shocking.
All in front of police. And then when the police backup came, their answer to it was, let's separate the groups.
Yeah, and that always seems to be the response.
There's an equivalence.
Avi, we're out of time, but I have to say I admire your courage and your gutsiness. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching tonight. Here's Paul Murray.